introduce our speaker today. We're done with the Steves. So the last 2 weeks of the Steves, we're now on to Kristie. Kristie Macrakis is a professor in the School of History and Sociology at Georgia Tech University and an internationally recognized historian. You can, if you Google her, or if you will find talks on top of talks on top of talks around the world where she's been invited to talk about her expertise. She received her PhD in history from Harvard and then went on to teach at Georgia Tech in 2009, where she teaches courses in the history of science and espionage. She's the author of over 30 articles, and her books include Surviving the Swastika, Scientific Research in Nazi Germany, Science Under Socialism, East Germany in Comparative Perspective, East German Foreign Intelligence, Seduced by Secrets Inside the Stasi Spy Tech World, and Prisoners, Lovers, and Spies, The Story of Invisible Ink, which is her latest book, came out a couple years ago. That one we've used consistently when we're talking about early American secret writing communications and trying to track down what is the damn recipe that Washington and others used called their sympathetic stain. And so that book's been an invaluable resource for us as we move forward trying to crack this enigma of 240 years ago and how they were writing in secretly to one another. I talked about this with Amanda before. When I was working on my PhD, back a bit, mine's history of science and technology as well, and I read a couple of your books as part of it, because I do Nazi science a little bit as well. And it's weird in this job from Oleg Kalugin and others that I read as a grad student to get to meet people in person. It's kind of a nice perk. It's rare that a historian actually gets to meet people who are doing, not only who are living, but also are the top in their field, and Kristie is definitely one of those. So please join me in welcoming Kristie Macrakis.
Well, thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm very fond of the Spy Museum, so I always say yes when they invite me here to speak. I think this is the third time I've been in this auditorium. And I've heard a lot about the audience. I'm thrilled to see a packed room here today. So I guess I have about 50 minutes to an hour to talk, this is a very image-rich presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. So the title is, well, Every Citizen a Target was actually Amanda's title, but I'm really going to talk about the Stasi's secret communication methods, although I am going to talk about Amanda's question. Well, she didn't phrase it as a question, so she said, will you speak at the Spy Museum on Every Citizen a Target, without a question mark? And I said, well, I don't know. Let's put a question mark on that. Was every citizen a target in communist East Germany? So I'm actually going to tell a little different story than the one would suggest about everyone being a target. I'll keep you in suspense for a while whether everyone was a target or not. But I do want to say there is an assumption about the Stasi and communist East Germany that everyone was a target. That's why people are so scared of, they call the NSA's Overreach. You know, that might be like the Stasi and everyone's going to be spied upon in America, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to tell you the real story behind the exaggerations and hyperbole. But what I do want to talk about, this is a nice, I like this emblem, the Ministry for State Security. So the Ministry for State Security includes foreign intelligence and internal and domestic spying, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But before I start, I think also a lot of people's image of the Stasi rests on, of course, what they see in films, etc. How many people here have seen The Lies of Others? Oh, a lot of people. Good. Okay. I actually viewed it again in preparation for this talk just to remind myself of the conception of the Stasi shows. And of course, it's about internal intelligence. The difference with that movie than the common conception of the Stasi is, of course, at the end, the guy comes out as a good guy. I mean, at first, he's a bad guy, and you know, he has the earphones on, is eavesdropping on people, and then in the end, he turns out a good guy. There was one sentence that struck me in the film. At the end, Gerhard Drehmen, he runs into Minister Hempf at the end after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and he was the one that ordered the surveillance, and he said, oh, why hadn't I been monitored? I thought everyone was monitored. And the guy said, you had full surveillance. However, the point is, He just didn't have, it wasn't passive surveillance. He was under suspicion. They wanted to watch him. So then they said, okay, let's put an order. We're going to put him under surveillance. So there's a common conception that people are just always being watched. I mean, your TV is watching you or your phone is tapped and everyone. That wasn't the case. Even in East Germany, where so many people were watched. You had to put in, I mean, it was very bureaucratic. You had to put a file note in, and you opened a file, an operative Vorgang, operational file on the person, and then they were watched for a specific period of time. So that's one of those myths about the Stasi, that they were always being spied upon. So it was targeted. So my presentation today is going to be in 3 parts. I will address the issue of whether every citizen was a target. And then I'm going to turn to the core of the presentation, which is basically the theme of this lecture series, how information and secrets get stolen and passed on. So the theme is secret communication. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And how many people have been to the other presentations? Raise your hand. Oh, good. Okay, so you have some nice background. So I'll modulate the talk a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to close with the Ministry for State Security Big Ear. The Big Ear is the Stasi equivalent of the NSA. And a lot of people don't know about it because it was a secret weapon. They thought they didn't have good electronic eavesdropping. I say MFS here. That's the acronym for Ministry for State Security. I use Stasi. The problem with Stasi, it's usually a pejorative term, but I use them interchangeably because most of people have heard of the Stasi and probably not MFS, where the pros, the intelligence officers, would have heard of MFS. So just in case you're wondering what I'm talking about. So let's start here. So in the previous slide I showed you of the emblem, I said there was the Ministry for State Security, MFS or Stasi. It had internal security, domestic espionage, and foreign intelligence. So on the left, you have Minister Erich Mielke, who is head of the whole Stasi. And on the right, you have the legendary spy chief, Markus Wolf. And he was head of what was called the Hauptverwaltung Aufklärung, which was the chief intelligence directorate. And so he was in charge of foreign intelligence, basically. So the guy on the right was in charge of foreign intelligence, and Erich Mielke was in charge of the Stasi in general, and he concentrated on domestic surveillance and internal security. So here are some facts and figures which you probably know, and these all made headline news after 1989. In 1989, there were 91,000 full-time officers and non-commissioned personnel in a population of about 6 million people. So that makes it about 1 in every 165 inhabitants worked for the Stasi. Only 4,000 of that number worked for foreign intelligence, the HVA. So it was comparatively small compared to the general Stasi. But small, but powerful and effective. Indeed, it's been called one of the most effective spy agencies in history. So they called their agents and then their snitches, basically. So inoffizielle Mitarbeiter, unofficial staff members, that's another bureaucratic jargon word. That includes informants, or inside Germany, but it also includes secret agents who steal secrets from the West and pass it on to the East. So at the end of '89, East Germany had that is Markus Wolf, the charming intelligence chief, had 1,553 agents in West Germany, many of whom were West German. So that's a very large figure. I mean, West Germany was overrun with East German agents. So let me briefly discuss the question of whether every citizen was a target. I think you know what I'm going to say. No, not every citizen was a target. It was focused, targeted intelligence. It seemed like everyone was a target because there were so many enemies of the state. In the end, a lot of people were targets. But everyone thought everyone was a target. I actually, when I was a student, I lived in East Germany, and I got really paranoid. Like, is this person really a friend? Like, are they talking to me because they're an informant? But everyone thought everyone was an informant. That wasn't the case. Usually, it would be like maybe one person out of, your department or something might be the informant or whatever. But the society was overrun, and it's scary, and it's a lesson for history where you had husbands spying on wives and children working for the Stasi. It wasn't a nice situation. So again, you had to get a tip that someone was doing something wrong to put them under surveillance or observation. So, well, they make the distinction between observation and surveillance, but you could give a whole lecture on the distinction. But, you know, when I think of surveillance, I think of constant surveillance, like all the cameras around us that are always taking in all the information, whereas an observation is like, you know, I could sic someone on you and they'll trail you for 3 days and find out where you went. So there is a distinction there. In East Germany, the main targets were these groups, dissidents and the opposition. They hated dissidents. You know, you could be convicted of a political crime. They didn't like artists and writers, and the churches and the opposition within the churches were internal targets. So that's the brief. Was everyone citizen a target? No. So let me turn to the core of my presentation and the theme of this lecture series. How did they do it? So I'm going to have a lot of images, and so hopefully when the new Spy Museum opens, I can actually use the artifacts in my presentations and show you things, because I know they have a lot of similar artifacts. Keith Melton, who's on the board of the museum, donated his collection to the Spy Museum, and a lot of his collection includes things from the Stasi and the Foreign Intelligence Unit. And I went to his museum in Florida when I wrote my Seduced by Secrets book. And so some of these images are probably from his collection there, but unfortunately there was nothing here I could demonstrate with. But there will be hopefully next time when we're at the new museum. So this is a camera hidden in a bag. Now these are images for how they spied on people for internal spying. So they had observation cameras. So they were, you know, you become really inventive. So this is a handbag, and there's a camera hidden in the handbag, so you could be walking along and just taking someone's pictures. And of course, these seem really archaic now in our modern world, but and you'll see even more images are even more archaic. This is one of my favorite it's an observation van, and so it looks just like a regular lorry, you know, carrying, you know, maybe it could be an ice truck or whatever, but all these numbers were like they're little holes in cameras and things like that, so you could be parked somewhere and just observe the scene, again, for internal intelligence. And I have, here's some, so there, oops, let me just go back here. So let's see, you've got a camera and then something on top of the cooling place so you can look out, and then some TV monitors and things, and eavesdropping. So that would be mobile surveillance. And then this is another, oh, this is my favorite one, actually, not the last one. When kids open my books, they immediately go to that image in it. And so this is the bra camera. And the Spy Museum should get one of these, too. I'm sure it'll get a lot of attention. So sex and spying and bras and cameras is. So this was for internal surveillance. So basically, you would wear a dress over this. I mean, I could have a camera right here because I want to get pictures of my audience. So this is an internal observation camera. And then this is the last image I'll show you for this section. And this is a robot. This is actually at Keith Melton's museum in Florida. And so this is a West German robot observation camera. And it says, there's nothing better. So Robot was actually a West German camera company. And what the Stasi would do is they'd modify a lot of commercial equipment. So this is I like this because it has the eye, you know, of watching, you know, image of surveillance. So that concludes the visual presentation on that. So there's a German saying that says, Vertrauen ist gut, Kontrolle ist besser. Oh, that should be a T after ist. Trust is fine, but surveillance is better. I suppose the English analog is, as a CIA officer told me, in God we trust, everyone else we monitor.
Let us go through the bra camera. I mean the dress.
Well, I'm not going to demonstrate, but well, I can. Here, I'll quickly go back to this slide. So yeah, you just, I mean, you're a man, so I guess you don't wear a bra, but I mean the bra holds it up. You just plant it in there and it holds it up. And it works best with a summer dress, obviously. And in the file I saw, it had the image of a woman in a summer dress modeling the camera. So you just plop it in between there.
It helps have big cleavage.
Yeah, right. So let me turn to the second part of the presentation on foreign intelligence, on passing on secrets, stealing and passing on secrets. I'm not sure how familiar the audience is with that, but foreign intelligence is basically what the CIA does, and when you think of secret agents, they're stealing secrets from abroad. And so, well, this image, I know it's hard to see, I'm just using it to explain it. It's reprinted in an article I wrote called The Case of Agent Gorbachev, and it's also in the book on Seduced by Secrets. But the reason I'm showing it is, let me just briefly explain. Okay, so let's say you're East Germany and you want to steal secrets from the West. East Germany stole a lot of scientific technical secrets from the West because they wanted to improve their own science and rickety science and technology. So the way it would work is, this is a case of a West German in the 1950s who spied for the Stasi at AEG. And so basically the first image is, so the guy had a key to the safe, right? The files. He was recruited. This guy was recruited based on a variety of motivations, probably money, and also his ego is involved too. And at first he didn't know he was spying for the Stasi. That's another trick you use. They just said, oh, we're with the Ministry for Commercial Affairs, etc. Anyway, so he starts working for the Stasi. He meets his case officer. He gives the files to the case officer, and then it gets off to be evaluated, and then it goes to industry, or it goes to the Soviet Union if it's military secrets. And Rainer Rupp was a key person for that. So the reason I'm showing this is, so of course before he hands the secrets to his case officer, he has to take pictures of the secrets, right? And then, there are a variety, I'm going to showcase a variety of methods you use in order to steal the secrets and pass them on. So basically, you need to communicate the secrets back to your case officer and to headquarters. So, of course, it's very dangerous stealing secrets, right? I mean, so you have to find surreptitious ways to do it. And the Spy Museum, many of you have wandered through there. There are lots and lots of gadgets that show you how you can steal secrets, store secrets, pass secrets on. And so there are several ways to do it. And the CIA calls it COVCOM, covert communications. The East Bloc, the Stasi, and the KGB call it operational technology. So there are two different ways you can pass on secrets. You can have a direct meeting with your case officer. Actually, this guy sometimes would just stuff the files in his briefcase and give them to his officer and then take them back to the office the next day. That's one method to do it. And then you with the direct meeting with the case officer. So what's wrong with a direct meeting? Loud?
You can be caught.
Yeah, you can be caught. Yeah, someone can observe you meeting with someone. So that's why you develop indirect communication using spy tech. And that's what I'm going to showcase here. So there are basically 5 components to spy tech communication. I don't know if anyone's covered these in previous lectures, but I know Steve Budiansky covered the NSA, so he looked at large-scale eavesdropping. So you didn't look at, this is what I call agent technology agents use. So the 5 components, and I'm going to go over all of them, stressing the first 2. And even though I wrote a book on secret writing, I'm just going to have one slide on that. That can leave that for another time. So the first thing we're going to look at is containers, or they're called concealments in America. Anyone know what a concealment is?
Robert Hansen did, perhaps? Just dropping the... Yeah.
Oh, well, he put stuff in garbage bags in the cemetery and things like that. Well, that's close. A concealment is basically a device you use to hide your material. And of course, he might have used it, like he might have had like a stake or something out in the forest he was at and hid material in it. But that was an example, that's a good example of indirect communication, because he didn't actually meet with them. He would leave stuff in garbage bags and then they would come and get it. So in America, of course, that, you know, if you have, there's so many plastic bags around, if you use something like that, that's a good cover. So, so that you need things to hide your stuff, and I'll show you the variety of artifacts they had to hide things. And these are all artifacts I'm showing you as well. And then I'm going to look at some spy cameras, and then briefly secret writing or invisible ink. People did use invisible ink in secret writing. And briefly codes, and briefly radios. So those are the 5 components of secret communication. You need to hide your material. You need to steal it and take pictures of it and pass it on. If you need to communicate, you write it in secret writing or invisible ink. Communication either with your officer or back. Codes, that's another way to conceal your writing, is with codes. And then finally radios, if you want to communicate and talk, you actually use a shortwave radio and a variety of methods there, and I'll get to that. So let's turn to the first one. So here's Q, the gadget man, my favorite person in the James Bond films. I can't wait till we get to the section on Q and what they're going to do with Q. So you all think that spy I was telling you about just went to Q and said, okay, I need to get these secrets. You know, can you issue me a fast sports car with, you know, fire-spitting things? Well, here he has a variety. There are a few scenes, when I teach my undergraduates, I like to show reality, myth and reality, and there are a few scenes in James Bond film where he actually uses a Minox camera, but other than that, most of that stuff, as you know, is fanciful. So here is Q, my favorite Q. I don't like the new ones. They don't cut it for me. So of course there are guns and things like that. That's rarely used. I mean, you don't need guns to communicate secretly. Let's see what he has here. Well, that thing on the right, is that a radio with buttons? It could be. He must have a camera here somewhere. There's a camera right there. So some of the ones are real, but no, you don't actually do that. In my book, you know, Seduced by Secrets, I refer to a guy and I say he was the Q of East Germany because he was kind of the gadget man who would issue things like that. But there were lots of little Qs. There just wasn't one guy you went to. But basically, the material was usually issued to the case officer, and then the case officer would give it to the agent. So here's some shells with some containers. That's what they're called in Germany. In America, they're usually called concealments. I think they're both good and descriptive names for what you're doing. So this was one of the fun things I had when I researched that book. I had a blast. I was in Germany, and I got to go to the German FBI, the Bundeskriminalamt, and there was a really fun guy who showed me all the various artifacts. Unlike the Spy Museum, they won't take their stuff out, but let me touch it and show it to you. But here, I got to touch everything. He showed me everything. I had a blast. So this is, and I know the Spy Museum would probably kill to get this stuff, but there's a German, now there's a Berlin Spy Museum, but this is just a whole series of containers on the shelves in the back room. There's some handbags, those are good ones, and there are a variety of things you can hide. I mean, you can hide a passport, you know, in a secret compartment in your handbag. You can just use something really ordinary like a steak in the back room, or, you know, at one point I'll show you why they had to really start changing around what they did, but, you know, one person used a tire compressor in their garage to hide things. So, and my students, we used to have fun with that with the undergraduates. They were very inventive, making up containers, you know, that were very American, like a plastic bottle or a soda can, and what you could do to hide your material. So this is the back room at the Bundeskriminalamt, and this is the container section. And they also had stuff in display, and then they would give stuff to museums to use for display as artifacts as well. And then you can't touch them, but once they reach a museum. So this is my favorite container. So this is a deer container. I think it's so nicely carved, and I wish I could have met the person who did it. So what do you think is hiding in this deer?
Film.
Film. It could be film, but it's not film.
Microphone.
It could be, but it's not. You were warm with film. Camera, yes, there's a camera in there. So, of course, so you want to find a container that will be the right size. So there's a Minox camera in there, and I'll show it to you in a few minutes. So you're wondering, well, how do you think you open this thing up? You just twist it and it opens, or?
From the underside,
From the underside, and what happens from the underside?
you can get to it.
Yeah. So you just open it. It opens that easily. Would you really want, if I were a spy and I had this in my country cottage, I wouldn't want someone to pick it up and just open it. I would want it to make it difficult to open it, right? So that's what they did. They had actually very well-qualified people working on these things, technicians and engineers, and they were quite inventive. So I'll show it to you open and then tell you the secret behind this. And unfortunately, I can't demonstrate with the artifacts, so just use your imagination a little. So here I am at Regenhardt's back room, and he was lots of fun because, of course, I didn't know when I started how you open this thing, because he handed it to me and nothing would happen. I couldn't open it, right? You can't open it just like that. So, well, you can see there's a little mechanism there. So basically what you do is you put a pin in a tiny hole underneath and it unlocks the mechanism and it pops open. And there's your spy camera.
Can you put the cameras in the eyes of the deer?
What's that?
In the eyes of the deer?
Oh, no, that's not the point of the camera. I mean, the camera, it's just a storage. Basically, it's a storage place. So you're putting the Minox there. It's not an observation camera or anything like that. It's just storing the camera, hiding it. You want to store it and hide it. See, how am I doing? Oh, it's a quarter of 11. When did we start? Oh, we only start at quarter after. We have plenty of time. Okay. I was thinking we started at 10. So that's the pin principle. So here's actually a pin. And so, oh gosh, when it took me a while to figure. I think he finally had to tell me, and he took out the magic pin. And then he showed me, dozens of artifacts and showed me, the pin principle. So here, the ashtray. And then I had to find the pin. That wasn't always easy either. So, you'd have to, okay, where is the little pin, right? So here is another. This is an ashtray. There are a lot of smoking themes here. So this is another Minox hidden in an ashtray. The Minox camera was the workhorse of the Cold War. How many people have a Minox? Just a few people. Okay. You have a regular commercial one or a spy one? Yeah, you could get them commercially. I'm not a big collector or anything, but I have a couple of them. Well, one of them was used in a spy case, and I bought it from someone. And gosh, I should have brought it. Anyway, the other one was just one I bought. I had two other ones I just bought, like on my flight to Germany. You could just get them commercially, and they were small those days. I mean, compared to now, of course, they're like lorry trucks or something, but back then this was something small, and you could even get them smaller by the 1980s or 90s. So this is really deep Cold War stuff. But they're small, and also you could hide it like also in your tights or something like that. So this is an ashtray. So this is a Minox. So Keith gave me this picture. Keith Melton, who's the big collector. So here is a Minox that was in a glove. Now, so I showed you this and I told you how I learned this trick. So do you think they just kept using the pin principle? Like what, isn't that problematic, right? Like if once West, because I saw all this stuff in the Bundeskriminalamt, so those were all busted agents. And so then the West, the East should know, oh, now they know our secrets, right? They've figured it out. So we can't just always use the pin principle, right? Because I raised that, I said, well, now that I've figured out, now I know. And they said, oh, okay, well, then they changed their methods, of course. They had to become more inventive. You just couldn't always use the pin principle. So I have a couple of other styles. Now, this is an interesting container. It's called a destructive container. So it destroys the contents when it's open with a flash bulb. It exposes the film. So even if they open it, then the secrets are all erased. So you don't have to worry about that being used as evidence in court. So there you have a container, and the flash bulb exposes it. So now I'm going to turn more specifically to cameras. So that was the section on containers and concealments. So here, this is from Keith's collection in Florida. These are document spy cameras. Now, those look like lipstick containers, right? Well, in fact, they're called, well, we call them lipstick containers. In fact, some of them, the KGB ones on the right, the red ones are in fact the cameras inside disguised as a lipstick thing. So we have the Venus subminiature camera. Did I hear someone say something? Is there a question or a comment? No? Okay. So that's a Venus subminiature camera. I'm just basically going to give you a survey, and if you want more detail, I have more details in the book. I don't want to overload you with information, but I'm happy to entertain questions. And these were made at Carl Zeiss Jena, which was, a lot of you have probably heard of Carl Zeiss Jena. It's a very prominent optical company. And then that, again, that's the KGB lipstick camera. So they're all, they're pretty small if they're as big as a lipstick container. So this is I don't remember, is that my hand or Keith's hand? But in any case, that's to show you a Macrakis with a remote release. So that's a tiny camera. I remember I was really excited when I found the blueprints for this from Carl Zeiss Jena to build this little tiny little, I mean, that's small even for our day, right? I mean, and so it has a remote release so you can click it and it takes the picture. So there, you hide your cameras. This is a camera in a cigarette pack. This is a wristwatch camera. This is your like Dick Tracy style. That's what everyone thinks this is like the cameras you're going to use. Like, this is a problematic camera, of course. It's so big and bulky, like walking around with that wouldn't be very secretive or concealed, yeah. Now I just want to, now you'll notice I don't have a lot of 35 millimeter cameras, or I don't have some video cameras at the stationary setting, but I did want to say something about that in that back room at the German FBI, there were lots of shelves of just ordinary cameras that they found in agents' apartments or houses, because you can just use a regular 35 millimeter camera as well. You can get a stand and take pictures on that. And then there, your cover story is it's just an ordinary camera. The other, even better way is and this was popular with some of the big spies also, important spies like Günther Guillaume. So they had movie cameras, and you'd put it on the stationary setting, and at the beginning you'd have all these movies of your kids playing in the backyard or something, and you didn't get to the secrets till the middle. So if someone happened to find it early on, they'd only see the kids playing in the yard and maybe lose interest and not get to the secrets. So that was popular. They used these Bauer cameras as well. Of course, these days those seem like dinosaurs, but they did use. So I did want to say that. I just showed you the spy issue kind, but there were just you could just use regular commercial cameras. Of course, these days there's a lot of commercial stuff you can use that you don't need to get special things, but I'm sure spy agencies continue to modify what we already have.
What are the things today?
Well, I don't know if I'm at the liberty to say, even if I knew, but someone will tell me, I'm sure, and then I'll spill the secrets. But actually, I think a lot of commercial stuff you can use today. I mean, it's amazing what you can buy on the market, and to conceal things. And of course, people these days you use a lot. I mean, from Edward Snowden, you just need a travel drive and you can download all the secrets. So you don't need a lot of cameras and things. You can download lots of information on a flash drive. Yeah. So you don't need a lot of this stuff anymore. But the old-fashioned way, as I say, when we get to secret ink, might be better. Yeah.
About what year did first world spy agencies move away from film and over to digital?
What's that?
About what year?
What year? I didn't hear that part of the question. Well, just I think it's happened en masse in the last. Edward Snowden was 2013, so that was 4 years ago. I think at least a lot of the cases that have come to light have been in the last 5 to 10 years, and those are people like Snowden. Then there was there was this other case of Harold Martin who who, everyone heard of the Harold Martin case? It was he was another guy who hoarded material, and he worked for the NSA also, and he just hoarded the material. He brought it home, and he had all this stuff on his computer. And so, I mean, it would be just logical just to put everything on a travel drive. I mean, why, you can just do that pretty easily. But we can talk more about that in the Q&A. So here, I'm not going to talk about codes in depth. I mean, part of this, of course, is I just want to give you a visual sense of things. So this is well, you can hide these codes, and that's another container. That's a lighter. Again, smoking was a theme here because people smoked more back then. One other thing I wanted to mention about containers, which is important. This is humorous. When I was reading the Stasi files, the guy writes, lots of common sense, like, well, you don't want to give a non-smoker an ashtray and a lighter as concealments. And you don't want to give someone who's bald a spray, hairspray to conceal their stuff. So you have to match, things to the people, right? So, so anyway, people smoke more then. So here you have a lighter. And these are little code sheets. They're very tiny. I mean, you could hide those in walnuts. I think the Kohler book has a picture of one in walnut. And they use the 5-number code and the one-time pads, which are very secure. And with codes, you could also, you can pass the code on through radio by using a radio to pass that on. Oh, I see. Why did this? Okay, now we're with secret writing, so number 3 of the 5 components of secret communication. So again, I just have this one slide, and I know a lot about this. I could give you a whole lecture on it, but since we're looking at the 5 components, and of course, invisible ink, well, there are a lot of visual things I can show, and I like to demonstrate things as well, as Vince was talking about the George Washington and secret, communication and secret writing and sympathetic stain, and we could demonstrate with that as well. But this is just very primitive on the left. Lemon juice when you're a kid, you put it on the light. But here on the right is a much more sophisticated formula for secret writing, invisible ink, that the Stasi developed. I was totally excited when I found that when I was working in the Stasi archives, because at that time in the West, they would never reveal their secrets. The CIA refused to reveal World War I secrets. So let alone Cold War secrets. So my heart started beating really fast, and I said, I don't believe they gave me this secret material. I'm not a chemist, I'm a historian. Here you have all these chemical formulas for it. So I thought they made a mistake, so I thought I should write this all down, because they're going to take this folder back. They're going to say, oh, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, we can't copy this. So I spent, an hour just transcribing the whole file. But I put in an order to copy it anyway, and at the end of the day, the guy handed me a copy of the whole thing, so I was being over paranoid, I guess. But in any case, that was a secret formula from the 1970s. That was actually a very sophisticated secret ink formula using high-end chemicals. So when I went back home, I asked a chemist to reproduce it with me. We had lots of fun, and we reproduced it. You can read that story in the, I guess that's in the Invisible Ink book, maybe briefly in the Seduced by Secrets. But so we reproduced that, and well, just to briefly state, and of course, you don't want to use that simple method, because it's very easy with a UV light to see, or just put something over heat. Heat and light are the enemies of secret writing, so you want something more sophisticated chemically. And so there, with the Stasi one, you basically impregnate some paper with the secret substance, and then you use the sandwich method. You write on the top, and it goes like a carbon, and it goes back to then you don't want to leave impressions on it either. So there's a whole art to secret writing as well. So the Stasi did develop some, secret writing, and of course the agencies would, they would steal stuff back and forth. Like if someone was exposed, then they'd get it and they'd reproduce it themselves and go back and forth that way. Now, why is this? We did codes. So radios. Now we're on radios. So Well, this is just a commercial shortwave radio. Grundig was a popular German brand. And so that's another, you could say, oh, I just had a radio in here. I'm not a spy, because that's another just ordinary thing you'd have in your apartment or house. And so this is just a regular shortwave radio, so you could communicate that. So you got to a specific frequency, and you would have an arranged time that you would communicate with your case officer. And well, when Regenhard showed me that, there was like a march beforehand, and then they would. You wanted to keep that communication very short. Why do you want to keep your communication short?
Because otherwise it could be overheard by the people who.
Yeah. It's very easy to, there's direction finding, first of all, so they could find out your location or knock on your door and say you're a spy, you're arrested. So they had this whole art of just getting burst transmissions. The CIA was good at developing those, so you wanted to communicate very quickly and shortly. And there was a really cool method they developed. Only the top spies got that, like Dieter Forstein and other people. There were only 3 or 4 spies. It was called a Schnellgeber. Basically, it sped up your communication, and you'd get on the phone, and you'd put this device on the phone, and it would quickly transmit the message to the other side. So that was the secret is here of radios and communicating, is you wanted it to be very brief and quick, so you wouldn't get caught. So finally, I want to turn to electronic eavesdropping. And this is something that most people don't know a lot about, and it was new to me when I learned about it. The Stasi had a secret weapon. So the Stasi is also very well known for human intelligence, which means they use spies and secret agents to steal secrets. America's very good at technical intelligence, stealing secrets, as you know, about spy planes and satellites and even submarines and tunnels. And you learned about the tunnel, right? So that's a technical intelligence. So that's a good example of technical intelligence. So there's also the NSA. How many people have not heard of the NSA? Oh, it's not secret anymore. That's what I say. It used to be called No Such Agency, but I've redubbed it Not Secret anymore. This is this was a big surprise to Western intelligence that the Stasi also had a big ear like the NSA. The interesting thing was that I interviewed this guy, Horst Menchen. He only had one arm from an accident or something, but it's not well known. I climbed a mountain at Teufelsberg to look at their old equipment there. You see some radons and things like that. So it's the equivalent of the NSA in Germany. And of course, people were surprised because I thought, oh, East Germany, they're backward in science and technology. They used a lot of secret agents and human intelligence. They weren't necessarily good at technical intelligence. Now, he had his kind of own empire. I mentioned Marcus Wolf, who relied a lot on human intelligence, like the Soviet KGB. But Horst Menchen told me, well, they didn't agree on things like, that Wolf wanted them to continue use human agents. And Menchen, he was totally in awe of the American achievements. Like, he just was in awe of American technology and achievements. And here I was, this American, talking about this. And so he built his empire. It was called, prosaically, Department 3, and he had his own little empire, but it was a late bloomer. It was a bureaucratic late bloomer. They didn't start till 1968 or so. But so his name is also synonymous with this big ear. So they had a big covert ear, and it was a great secret weapon because the West underestimated their capacity in this area. And so, again, since Menchen admired the Western achievements, he wanted to reverse it and apply it to East Germany. So it was only after the fall of the Berlin Wall that they were considered a major player in eavesdropping. So here's Teufelsberg, Field Station, Berlin. Well, that's just on the outskirts of Berlin. Actually, that's an American station there, and of course the East was very interested in Teufelsberg. I went to a conference there once. They also had equipment in Cuba, just our neighbor 90 miles away, so they could spy on us, on the US. Both the MFS and the KGB built Cuba's security services. And so they had secret writing department, and they had electronic eavesdropping on Guantanamo, and a variety of other things. So I guess the lesson to learn is you shouldn't underestimate backward foreign states here. So this is just a chronology of the big years as a bureaucratic late bloomer. Well, there's that typical image of eavesdropping, and then this was in the Hartz Mountains. That was the mountain I climbed. So, when they started in the 50s, they did have radio electronic counterintelligence to catch spies. As I told you earlier, that, that's what you did. You used direction finding to catch spies. That's why you want quick transmissions. And in the 50s alone, they found 200 radio spies.
You say the Hartz Mountain, East Germany?
Yeah, right on the border. Like, there are mountains right on the border, so it's good eavesdropping. I don't have an image of that, but it was good eavesdropping on the west. So Horst Mention had 3,000 staff members, so his was almost as big as Wolf's foreign intelligence. So now I want to start concluding the lecture. Can we make comparisons with Stasi and the NSA? Of course, everyone knows about the NSA and its capabilities. The East German achievement was in a communist totalitarian context, and it had limited geographic reach. It wasn't global like the NSA. So basically, it mostly spied on West Germany. Of course, there was no oversight in East Germany. Spies like that, they don't like oversight anywhere. And there was surveillance, and allegedly they wanted to know everything about everyone, which really wasn't quite true. And of course, in the West, we have a democracy. Is the technology totalitarian, though, since we have complete coverage? There was that collect it all mentality that Snowden complained about. So the reason I bring up the NSA is just, I think there's a real obsession or worry in America that we're going to turn, all our capabilities against our own citizens. But we usually have mechanisms that say, wait, something comes to light, and we say, stop, just like Edward Snowden wanted to put a stop to this. In the 1970s, we had congressional oversight because of intelligence abuse, and there was a self-correction there that, wait a minute, they've overstepped their boundaries. So we do have mechanisms to slow things down. So I think that's why people are worried about turning things against their own citizens. So this is an image, NSA and Stasi. So this is after the Snowden revelations, and not only did he claimed he was worried that the NSA was spying on its own citizens, but I think part of the revelation of that material is how global and effective the effort was, and so people in Germany are very sensitive to the Stasi and surveillance, and so, of course, the NSA had a much bigger reach than the Stasi did in their big ears. So here's a projection, United Stasi of America in Berlin, and then Stasi 2.0, saying that the NSA is going to be like the Stasi. So now let me just recap the main points of the lecture again, then we can open it up to Q&A. So was everyone a citizen a target? No. We looked at internal, domestic versus foreign intelligence stealing and passing on secrets from the West. And we covered the 5 components of agent technology, containers, cameras, secret writing, codes, radios. We looked briefly at the MFS big ears, and finally a brief comparison of the Stasi and the NSA. So I'm going to close there.
And I think she's ready for questions.
Oh, sorry, that was kind of abrupt, huh?
We're not clapping for this, that's us.
So on the pin technology, I'm over here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
On the pin thing, was it a special pin? Like, if you had a safety pin, would you be able to get into it?
Oh, you could use any pin.
You
I
could?
mean, yeah, the pins looked like just something you could use in sewing. Just any pin you could just, basically, you put it in and it popped it open. So it had a release mechanism. Yeah.
What happened to all of the Stasi employees, the 91,000 or so, once they West Germany merged?
That's a good question. Well, it's quite differentiated what happened to it. Of course, as you probably know, just everyone hated the Stasi, so there was an attempt to just rid of anyone who had Stasi background who worked. Well, if you worked for any governmental or educational institution, you were out. But again, it depended whether if you were with foreign intelligence or domestic intelligence. And then actually some people, enterprising people, started working for the Western agencies and the Bundeskriminalamt, the Western FBI. I mean, it's varied. Then I know some, people who opened up their own detective agencies. And once I went there on a trip and I kept seeing all these signs for it. So I finally called one and went to their office, and it turned out they had a Stasi background. Let's see what else. And then, then you had the secret agents who maybe spent time in jail. Dieter Feuerstein started working in patents. Sometimes it's really difficult if you were a secret agent and you spent time in prison to get a job. I know some Americans. Kid who was Jens Carney, he was an American. He's kind of embittered because he spent, he actually spent 11 years in jail in America. You get stiffer sentences here, and I used to invite him to my classes, and he couldn't get a job. At first he'd sell tickets at a theater, and then, I mean, when you have a conviction like that, it's hard to get a good job, unfortunately. But another guy who avoided the media did better, and he worked as, I don't know, in trucking or something. But so if you're a secret agent, you spent time in prison, it's hard. If you were, an officer, and then the retired ones, the ones who were near retirement, of course, were retired, and then they complained that they only got like 800 marks or something because they were Stasi, they were discriminated against. So, that, it was varied. So some people got back on their feet, some people remained bitter and unemployed. It really varied. Oh, a lot of questions. Are you gonna, or should I? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll grab them.
Oh, okay, you'll grab them.
In the more advanced versions of secret writing, how was it installed initially, and then how was it deciphered? In one example or so.
Wait, what do you mean by installed?
Well, I mean, the person who initiates the message, how does it's not using lemon juice, for example. What is the alternative to that?
Well, if you're issued, you could use lemon juice. Sometimes they did it just to write notes in a notebook or something, just to keep something a little more secure. But if you were issued it, I mean, it's important whether you were writing to headquarters or headquarters was writing to you. But you would write your message and you would just send a letter through the post office, and you'd have a cover letter saying, "Dear John, I'm sorry you're sick. I hope you get better," something inane like that. Then you knew it was a spy letter. And then in between, you would write your secret message, and then you would send it to a cover address, and then the person would pick it up.
I'm trying to get a handle on the not everyone was a target. So if something like churches or writers, like a general category like that, would that mean that churchgoers could be a target, or it would have to be you would be a church leader would be a target, or I mean, like was the average citizen?
Yeah, that's a good question. It would be more likely the church leaders. No, the whole congregation. There weren't that many churches, and there weren't that many churchgoers because it was a communist society. So I mean. But if you did something wrong, they would put you under surveillance. But the whole congregation wasn't under surveillance. But they were suspect because, kind of like, why are you going to church? This is a communist society. So that's not like being a dissident, but you're not doing something that's in line with what the expectations are for that society.
Right here.
You gave the breakdown of the employees and the informants. But wasn't there, how many actual files, like subject files or individual files, wasn't it in the millions of files on citizens?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Which is, to me, was the more important thing is, how many people actually had a Stasi file?
Yeah, so the question is?
How many people had a Stasi file?
Oh, well, have they released those figures? Yeah, well, we know a lot of people had it. I can't give you the precise figure, but a lot of people had Stasi files. Yeah, that's a good point. Now, the interesting thing with the Stasi files is they're different types. I mean, they're different degrees of Stasi files. Like, you know, you could have a file and it would have one piece of paper in it and it said, you know, nothing much. And then you could have like a dissident that some of them had 20 volumes, right? So that fills up all that space too, is like if someone had 20 volumes, then they were someone who was really targeted and looked into. So yeah, there were a lot of, I mean, it would be good, I should ask I mean, they're still counting probably. I should ask them how many files there actually were. But they're different types of files. I mean, I only mentioned it. So I said there are all these bureaucratic names for types of files. So an operative Vorgang, which is an operational file, you open that, like let's say you suspect that, let's say you're an American in Berlin and they think you're a spy, so they're going to open a file on you. And that would be another case of, you know, that would be typical counterintelligence for anywhere. And then they would open the operative Vorgang on you, and then it had all these subsections. Then there was something called operative Personenkontroll, an OPK. That was a person control file. That was if they wanted to monitor you and like maybe trail you and find out who you were, because you come into their society and know who is this foreigner here. So there were different sorts of files as well. And then there were well, this is important too, there were the internal and external files. So the ones you know about and you've heard about are mostly the domestic internal files, which is amazing how many there were. And as I said, there were 91,000 staff members. So, but the foreign department files, unfortunately for me and other people interested in foreign intelligence, were destroyed. So when I wrote my book, I had to piece together that history. There were some that were kept, like the defector delivered some to the West, and you know, I could look at those. And then the bones of them were kept. The CIA and a secret mission got a lot of the card files, so I could find out who the agents were. And then some other electronic things came to light. But the files themselves, most of those were destroyed. But in the early years, there was a bureaucratic mix. So the Gorbachev file, for instance, I found in the domestic things, even though he was run as a foreign agent, so I could get a sense of how things worked. And then you can look at court cases on the files on the agents who were caught. So, you know, those files aren't around, the Foreign Department ones, but they wouldn't be as many as the domestic ones. But, you know, how many files does the FBI have? I mean, they have a lot of files too. I mean, these agencies.
Was the West
Taking
able
turns.
Was the West able to infiltrate or turn anybody in the Stasi to get information during this time?
During the actual Cold War? Well, this is an interesting question. I could give a whole lecture on this. So, East Germany was a hard target. In fact, a CIA colleague of mine says that all of the agents that the CIA tried to recruit were double agents working for East Germany. So it was what the CIA calls a very hard target. However, there were defectors. And so just similarly with the KGB, there were lots of defectors that came to America, like Oleg, well, no, sorry, Oleg's not a defector, but there were, Penkovsky and other people were defectors who came here. And so there was a very important defector in science and technology, Werner Stiller, who died recently, and he brought all these secrets to the West and brought a lot of information to the West, and then he talked to West German intelligence and the CIA and then was resettled in America. So even if they weren't successful at recruiting actual people from there, there were defectors that came. And in the earlier years, there were some CIA agents and things, but then in the later years, you know, they failed. So.
Thank you very much. It was a great lecture. With the Stasi so very good, you know, at observing their own citizens, how in the world did the demonstrations against East Germany, I think there were several of them, and then, you know, when the Berlin Wall fell down, how was that possible?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Okay. How was it possible that there was demonstrations against the East Germans when the Stasi was so good at spying?
Well, yeah, well, so this is, yeah, that's the topic of another book too. So the whole demonstrations that started in I mean, it was a series of events that they could demonstrate and not worry about being put down, you're saying, like, you know, they could do it without being shot at, like the uprising in '53. You know, things had changed by 1989. And there were a whole series of events. You know, there had been perestroika and glasnost and easing of ideological strictness. And so, and that there was also, you know, more people had started going to the West. There were a lot of trends going on. So the question is like, well, why didn't they stop them? Why didn't they stop all the demonstrators? I think it was just a point in history where they didn't do that kind of thing anymore. I suppose they could have, then it would have been an international incident and they would have been censured. But, you know, I think they were trying to ease up on things, on travel regulations. More and more people were going to the West, were discontent. And at that point, you know, it just wasn't worth it anymore. And there were actually apparently some glitches, like they, you know, at one point when the order was given to open the wall, that was a mistake. I mean, there were just these, and then the media played a role as well. The media was watching, and CNN was, you know, that was the rise of CNN and global things. So they were being watched, and, you know, broadcasted all over the world. So the media played a role as well.
And they didn't have the backing of the Soviet Union. Is that part of it?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, that later the Soviet Union abandoned them, but. Oh, I think over here.
I think I read something recently. Was about the Romeos, and was that an East German effort, or was it East Germany and the KGB?
Oh, the Romeos were an East German effort. Yeah, actually, I just wrote an article about Marcus Wolf because he's the man who was on the right in the picture, and he was famous for the Romeo method. So I did notice, I think the CIA posted something on Valentine's Day about the Romeos, which I thought was a cynical way to celebrate Valentine's Day. So yeah, basically, so the Romeos were the reverse of honey trap. Honey trap is when you sick an attractive blonde woman or woman on a man, middle-aged man, who's flattered by this attention. And then a Romeo's reverse, where you sick a man on a woman. And basically, a lot of the Romeos, well, Mr. Wolf was a big cynic, so a lot of the Romeos were sent to the West, and they targeted secretaries. Secretaries are probably one of the best sources because they have access to all the secrets. So there were a lot of lonely secretaries in Bonn. And so this handsome guy would start courting you and taking you out to dinner and saying nice things about you, and you fall in love with him. See, the reverse, it's kind of sexist. I mean, when the Romeo targets a woman, you know, they're trying to get the woman to fall in love with him, whereas when the woman targets a man, it's all about sex. So, I mean, you have to modify this for human relations. But it was kind of sad. So after sometimes one person committed suicide after finding out that her boyfriend really wasn't, said, oh, it wasn't really serious. But then Wolf said, oh, well, I arranged a lot of happy marriages because then they would fall in love and stay together, and, that they truly fell in love. It wasn't just a ploy. But there were some unhappy cases. One more?
Yeah, speaking of the Romeo programs, have you seen that German TV show, That Same Sky?
What's it called?
It's called That Same Sky. It's on Netflix or
oh, That Same
Amazon.
Sky.
It's
No,
fabulous.
I'll have to watch it. It's about Romeos.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's great.
Oh, well, actually, I just got a tip from my brother to watch Berlin Babylon, and I wasn't on Netflix, so I just signed on to watch Berlin Babylon. So I'll watch that as well.
Came out a couple of years ago.
Well, there was something called Deutschland 83.
That's great too.
I watched part of that.
You have to get the DVDs though through Amazon.
Yeah, I have the DVDs for that. Yeah, so that was, and that if you watch Deutschland 83, there you have some cases of foreign intelligence as well. But it's kind of silly at the beginning where he gets knocked out and wakes up in the West. But anyway, that's TV.
The question I had though was about Teufelsberg. Mm-hmm. So that was operating for, 27, 28 years? Mm-hmm. Did the Stasi actually ever get anybody on the inside?
Oh, no, well, no, I don't think, well, yes, sorry, yes. Well, not only did, I was just thinking of two things. Yes, they did. I'll tell you briefly that story. I tell the story in detail in my book about that. But at first, they started taking pictures of the Teuselberg and all that. And then they got a source. It was basically a walk-in. His name was James Hall. And I know him. I interviewed him in prison in Kansas and Fort Leavenworth. And he's out now. So basically, James Hall worked for the military and for the NSA, and he was a walk-in. He double-dipped. He also helped out the KGB, and he worked for the Stasi. He passed on a lot of very damaging secrets. It really crippled the NSA in Berlin and Germany. And he was actually found and convicted shortly before the Berlin Wall fell. And he had a stiff sentence. I mean, his case was very serious. And so I have a whole section in my chapter in my book about that case. And when he was, I had to interview him in prison because he wasn't out yet. He got out a couple of years ago. So yeah, they did, and they had a couple of very important spies there. I mean, they were in their own backyard. That's why they had U.S. military. The Stasi didn't have a lot of success operating in the United States itself. The KGB was better at that, so they left it to them. But they did have Americans and Jeff Carney, the guy I mentioned before, also Kidd. He also worked for the NSA. So that duo, Kidd and Paul.
Did the Stasi and the KGB freely share information?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, freely share, this is kind of another cynical story, so it's kind of a one-way street that the Stasi gave the KGB a lot of stuff, but the KGB didn't give the Stasi a lot. In fact, in that diagram, I show a bifurcated line, and so the industrial secrets went to East Germany, and all the military secrets went to the KGB. So they passed on all those secrets to the KGB. Every once in a while, they would help out a little bit, but it was really lopsided and pretty much a one-way street. But they were called the brother organs. Each, that's what the KGB called the Stasi.
To rephrase that first question, instead of every citizen a target, would you say that perhaps every citizen was an agent, in that the Stasi tried to instill fear, perhaps, that you needed as your duty as a citizen to report on any suspicious activity among your neighbors, family, and so on?
Well, yeah. Well, I gave the statistics of the 91,000 people who worked for headquarters, and then you had, all the people who worked as informants. So, that certainly was one way of recruiting them. But so for the people who worked at it was 1 in 165. So that's the number. So it wasn't every citizen who was an agent, but a lot of citizens were agents or case officers. Given the size of the country, it was pretty overrun. Yeah, I don't want to minimize it, but I just don't want you to have the sense that, it was like a surveillance camera always passively surveilling people. It was more targeted than that. And there were a lot of people who were considered bad people that needed to be spied upon and snitched on. Because they needed to keep communism in order, and a lot of people were rebelling against it, and it would ruin their project.
Did they get any information when they were in Cuba?
Oh, yeah, they got a lot of interesting information from Cuba. So I have a section in my book on that. They got some good, they got some good operational stuff, too, for spy agents. For instance, I think they stole the U.S. visa stamp and some secret writing methods from the U.S. and passed those on to the Stasi. So the Cuba helped Stasi as well, and Stasi helped Cuba. They were friends. In terms of other intelligence, they surveilled Guantanamo and trying to think what they had, Operation Royal Palm. So yeah, they got some good information.
All right, Kristie. Oh, was there one?
Yeah,
one last question? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing about your time in East Germany. Were you doing research in the 80s or was it after the fall of the
Oh,
wall?
well, that's a good question. So it's funny because I'm sometimes asked, like, oh, when you were a grad student, were you researching the Stasi? No, I don't think so. I would be dead. This was in the late 80s, right before the wall fell, and I was actually researching my dissertation on Nazi Germany, so I wasn't researching the Stasi. But when I lived there, you know, everything was behind the scenes. Like, I had no idea, as a lot of people had no idea what was going on until after the fall of the wall, and oh, my eyes were just glued to the paper. You know, so-and-so was an informant, and there were so many people who did, and I thought, behind the drab walls of East Germany, all this was going on. This is where the action was. But so I got very curious to research it. And then since my beat was science and technology, I found a book by a defector, Werner Stiller, who brought the secrets to the West, and I got to know him, and he became a friend. But I got the inside scoop from him on all this information. So then I wrote about the Stasi afterwards, you know, way after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Kristie, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.